Welcome to the MSDN show. Continuing our focus on the .NET technologies, today we're going to talk to you about ASP.NET and how this new method of dealing with server-side scripting can increase the capabilities of your applications as web services on the internet. But before we get to that, let's check in with Erica and the news.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers. Welcome to the MSDN News Update. The Microsoft Reader is the first electronic reading software that uses ClearType technology to allow easy and comfortable reading of normal book-style information on a variety of different computer configurations. In addition to the many titles currently available for this platform, you can also prepare your own custom content to be displayed within the Microsoft Reader format using the recently released Microsoft Reader Content SDK. The SDK is available to download from the MSDN library. In early November, Microsoft researcher Sir Anthony Hoare was recognized for his pioneering and fundamental contributions to software science when he received the Kyoto Prize in Advanced Technology. Awarded annually by the Japanese Inamori Foundation, the Kyoto Prize is likened to the Nobel Prize and is one of the world's highest awards for a computer scientist. Winners are selected on the recommendation of their peers and must have made a significant contribution to the scientific, cultural, or spiritual betterment of society. On November 10th, Microsoft released the final version of Microsoft DirectX 8.0. New features of DirectX 8.0 include near photorealistic graphics, scalability for massively multiplayer games, and improved audio experiences. The new DirectX 8.0 SDK is also available and can be downloaded from the DirectX Developer Center. On November 12th, at his Comdex keynote address, Bill Gates announced the public availability of the first beta version of Microsoft Visual Studio .NET and the Microsoft .NET Framework, two key technologies for enabling developers to build web services on the .NET platform. Visual Studio .NET Beta 1 can be ordered on CD or downloaded from MSDN subscriber downloads. In conjunction with the release of Visual Studio .NET Beta 1, MSDN Online launched its new .NET Developer Center. The .NET Developer Center will provide .NET Framework and Visual Studio .NET developer information, including links to download the .NET Framework SDK Beta 1. Be sure to check out the show transcript for links to more information on these news items. And that's been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
If you've been paying attention to the episodes we've been having of the MSDN show, hopefully you've gotten the idea that .NET is pretty important and that Microsoft is spending an awful lot of time and energy developing things for .NET. Well, one aspect of .NET that's come out is ASP.NET. Now, we're going to take and talk about the architecture of ASP.NET, deal with how it works with the whole .NET architecture and framework and developing great websites and stuff like that. And to assist us with that is Mark Anders and Scott Guthrie. Mark, glad you could join us again. This is your second episode, and Scott, this is your first episode. First off, what exactly are you guys doing with ASP.NET, and what does it mean to you and the company?
Well, first of all, what we did was we started on ASP.NET 3 years ago. Actually, this month it is our third anniversary. And
what we did, 3 years you've been working on ASP.NET.
3 years we've been working on ASP.NET. And what we started off by doing was looking at ASP, which was a very, very successful platform for building web applications, looking at it, seeing what it had that was really good, and seeing ways that we could improve it. And so we spent about a year and a half really just brainstorming and coming up with ideas, and then began building it. And the result is ASP.NET.
Now, I guess one thing is that we recently changed the name from ASP Plus to ASP.NET. What exactly was the reason for that, and what does it mean?
Well, the reason was that the .NET initiative is really about a number of factors. It's about delivering software as a service. It's about XML and web services, and it's really enhancing the internet in terms of what it can do. And the thing that was known as ASP Plus, and it actually had a different name when we were developing it as well, was something that was named before we had .NET. I mean, it was ASP Plus, and we were sort of searching for a name. Once the .NET name came out, we really wanted to bring its name more in line with the rest of the platform pieces that make up the .NET framework.
And that,
so
that just basically properly identifies the fact that this new version of ASP is really tied in to all this .NET framework stuff we've been talking about these last few episodes.
Yeah, exactly. The important thing to realize about ASP.NET is not like we took the ASP code from previous versions of ASP and simply ported it on top of .NET or combined it with .NET. We really wrote it from the ground up. It's a completely different code base that we spent 3 years working on around these new ideas and around the common language runtime and around XML and
All the
so
other
it really
.NET stuff.
all the other .NET framework technologies.
Now, Scott, what exactly do you do with .NET then, or ASP.NET?
So basically, I work on the design team, working on coming up with features, and then working in terms of developing them with the development team.
So if I was wanting like a blink tag in ASP.NET, you'd be the person I'd talk to about that?
A blink tag, yes, that would probably be me.
Please
A
don't.
server-side blink tag would actually be an interesting thing.
Now, so you talked about this new architecture that ASP has taken and thus got the name of ASP.NET, and you rewrote it from scratch. Now, does that mean that if I'm an ASP programmer, I have to throw out everything I learned and relearn a new mindset for doing ASP.NET?
Absolutely not. If you're an ASP developer, you can take all of your existing skills and very, very easily apply them to ASP.NET. If you want to continue writing in the style that you've been writing in, you can continue to do that. All of that is there. If you want to take advantage of the new features, you can do that, but you can do that incrementally. And you can mix the old style of coding with a lot of the new features and take the best of both worlds.
Well, what then are some of the new features that I can get to access to? Why would I want to move over to the ASP.NET model?
Well, there are really a wealth of new features. Number one, all of the languages are now really first-class compiled languages. So one of the things that a lot of ASP users asked for was features in VB. They wanted features in VB script that VB had. Well, now you have full Visual Basic language. You also have lots of other languages such as C# or JavaScript, or even COBOL. We've shown demonstrated COBOL working inside of ASP. So you have much better languages. You also have a much more simple and powerful page development metaphor. There are now ways to encapsulate behavior into tags so that you can get a lot of behavior simply by putting a tag on your page. You don't have to write as much code. So we've done a lot of tests where we've taken, on the order of 400 lines of ASP code and reduced it to like 20 lines of ASP.NET code. So in terms of productivity, it's much more. Web services is also a critical element in terms of creating parts of your website that can be accessed programmatically by other computers. So as an example of an XML-based web service is taking different types of information and tying it together, like television listings, and tying that together with where somebody is and creating customized television listings. Businesses are using this to allow them to talk to other businesses. So being able to easily create these XML-based web services is another critical piece of ASP.NET.
But now, isn't that the same sort of thing that SOAP is supposed to be providing too?
Yes. Well, that's ASP.NET provides a very, very simple and easy way to create SOAP-based web services. It is part of that.
Oh, I see. Okay, so one of the aspects of SOAP is wrapping your page with all the little doohickeys that tell it what the properties, methods, events are that your procedures expose. And so ASP.NET just automatically does this on the pages.
Basically provides you a way you can automate it so that it's not a page that you're building. Instead, we have this notion of you're building a web service, which actually has a separate file extension. But basically, within that page, you can actually define methods that you want to make web callable. And all you need to do is write your code in that page, hit save. And if you hit that with the browser, you'll actually get a listing of all of the methods that are callable, as well as a SOAP description that actually will describe how to invoke it over SOAP. And you can either invoke it, those methods via a standard query string, or you could actually go ahead and dynamically create a COM proxy object that will automate all the network traffic, all the HTTP invocation, as well as all the XML marshalling to and from SOAP. so that you can actually invoke this service just like you would a regular method stored in a business object located on your server.
Yeah, an easy way to think about it is in the same way that ASP, when it came out, made it really easy to write dynamic web pages, ASP.NET makes it really easy to write dynamic web services. And as such, you just think about the code that you want to write and the data that you want to deal with. You don't have to think about XML. Now, if you want to think about XML, you can think about XML. But you could write, for example, a method to say, you give me a category name, and I'll query my stock database and my information of my business, how much I have in stock, and I'll return to you a list of the products that are in that category. Such as if I'm a grocery store, milk. You ask me for milk and I'll give you all the different types of milk that I sell. The way you do that in ASP Plus is you simply write a class in VB or C# that has a method that says get category, and it takes in the category name. It can go off and query SQL Server or any database or any XML data source, bring back the data and just return it. It doesn't have to think about actually converting it into XML. That'll be done for you automatically.
So we'll automatically handle taking an XML payload, converting it into an integer, and then if you return, say, a record set, we'll automatically handle taking that record set and serializing it out into XML. So all the things that you need to do with ASP, manually parsing XML, manually cracking the sort of the HTTP post content to try to get access to that raw payload to parse it, all that's automated for you. And what we also do as part of that is we basically dynamically maintain for you essentially a contract, if you will, that explains exactly how you invoke that. So you can very easily pass this contract off to other sites, and they can then start programming directly against your site. So an interesting example that one of our sites has done, and I think they're going to be guests on the show a little bit later, is they actually have come up with a list of samples for ASP Plus off of their site. And they exposed a web service that they then made available to other ASP.NET fan sites that listed all of the new samples that they'd written on that particular day. And so those sites can subscribe to their site and programmatically, once a day or once an hour, get a listing of all the new samples that they should go update all of their links to on their site to reference. That's an interesting way to do information, application to application style communication.
Yeah, so it's kind of no longer talking about looking at an ASP example page in a web browser by a user. Right. You're now talking about accessing it.
Exactly. That's really the whole vision of web services, is to realize that the internet is really all about information. And with HTML, we've come up with a very good way to present information to people in a browser. But if you need to expose that information to other processes or other programs, whether that be a partner or other parts of your company, we haven't really had a good way to do that. And what XML is great at is representing any type of data that you want. So you can create these services that other people can then talk to with a program and exchange data in a very, very rich way. And it's going to really be a very powerful thing, and enhances the types of applications that people can build, and long term will also make clients richer, because clients, if they get the data as well, can do a lot more with it.
And so you could even call this from an application that's not being a web browser on the client, but being just a regular Visual Basic or C# application.
Yes,
absolutely.
Exactly.
The other key thing is, because we're using SOAP and XML and open standards, one of the nice things that falls out is that we can actually talk to systems that don't have ASP.NET installed, whether they're Windows systems or Linux systems or Java-based systems. You can go ahead and communicate nicely, whether you're the receiver or the sender. You can exchange information that way. So you start to see applications all around the internet starting to interconnect in interesting ways, and as a result, you end up with much richer end-user applications.
Right. It gets into another aspect of really ASP.NET and the .NET framework, which is really to enable applications on any type of device. And that doesn't necessarily even mean that the devices will all be running the .NET framework. We've done a lot with direct support for things like WML in ASP.NET, so that you can easily build applications that target small devices, such as a WAP phone, or phones or other small devices that handle HTML. So with a single ASP.NET page, you can target multiple devices that might have very, very different characteristics.
And so the device coming at the page identifies the type of response it's wanting back out of it.
Exactly.
And then the ASP code identifies how to go small or large like that.
Yeah, basically we have a special suite of server controls. We call them mobile controls. And they automatically can emit WML or HTML or HTML depending on the type of device out there. So if you have, say, an Ericsson cell phone that might only have 4 or 5 lines of text, that goes ahead and invokes that page, we can actually automatically render an appropriate form factor for that.
Now, does that mean that the developer of the page has to think through all the different scenarios that might come at them? You know, here's a full color browser, here's a Pocket PC, and
No,
here's
and
a
that's
web
really
phone.
part of the magic of ASP.NET is by having this concept of these server controls that encapsulate a lot of the functionality for you, it really gives you a nice way of encapsulating the different behavior that you expect or the different renderings that you expect for different types of devices. And we do this in a lot of different scenarios. For example, we have a set of controls for doing validation, which is a very, very complicated thing to do in a website, especially when you want to, you know, emit script code that goes down to the client and does the validation. You also want to have server-side validation for down-level browsers. And we have a set of controls that will automate all of that for you. So they encapsulate the basic validation behavior. Yet if it's a rich browser, they'll emit one thing. They'll emit script code.
Right.
And if it's a down level, they'll run the validation and produce the exact same experience, except it's happening server-side, for those down-level browsers.
And they'll also automatically handle scenarios where clients deliberately try to go around client-side script or deactivate client script and spoof things.
Yeah.
They'll trap those as well. And all you need to do is drop these on your page declaratively as tags. And you can write 2 or 3 lines of code against them, and you actually have a fully validated page.
You should basically identify, you know, this is the form this number is supposed to be in,
Exactly.
phone number, zip
Exactly.
code, or something like that. And just
Yeah, there are a whole bunch of them. There's ones that say, you know, they just have to fill in something, or they have to fill in something that matches this regular expression, or they need to fill in a number that is within this range, or they need to, you know.
And they're extensible. So one of our third parties, a key part of our framework is really enabling third parties to do interesting stuff. So one of our third parties has actually come up with a zip code validator. You just drop it down on the page and point it at a text box, and it'll validate that whatever number you type into that text box is a valid zip code. You know, so that you can have very type-specific, scenario-driven validation. It just makes writing pages a lot easier.
Scott actually touched on sort of the final thing that was, you know, I was listing earlier the things that are sort of new in ASP.NET. And really the complete componentization of the system and allowing developers and third parties to plug in literally at any level of the system is the other big innovation. One of the things that we heard from people with ASP a lot was, I love ASP, I love this session state thing, but I wish it worked in a web form, for example. How can I make it work in a web form? And the answer was, well, you can't. With ASP.NET, number one, we've made session state work in a web form, so you're taken care of there. But if you actually wanted to completely replace our implementation of session state, you can do that. If you'd like to modify the way we do output caching, and ASP.NET also has output caching, you can easily do that because the entire system is componentized. Other people would say, we love things like the response and the request and the session and the application, but we really want to write kind of more at the ISAPI level. How can we do that? And the answer was, well, all of those things are built into ASP, and there's no way to drop down to that low level. With ASP.NET, you can.
Now, when you say ISAPI, that means there's essentially 2 different styles of an ISAPI application: the ISAPI application and an ISAPI filter, which solve 2 different problems. Now, I can imagine how ASP.NET could take care of the ISAPI application model. Does it also do anything with an ISAPI filter?
Yes, we also support what we call an HTTP module extensibility point, and it basically allows you to do ISAPI filter-like functionality. So some common examples of that, like Mark mentioned, replacing session state is actually done at that level. Doing things like URL rewriting. Say, for example, you wanted to, a common scenario that a lot of customers have asked for is they want to personalize a URL for a client, say a financial institution. So they can give you, a URL that looks friendly. www.financialinstitution.com/Scott. But they don't want to create a vroot. So they want to do some very fancy URL rewriting techniques. You can do that.
So when the URL comes in with /Scott in it, the ASP.NET actually switches around and goes wherever it's
Right,
supposed
so
to
you
go.
have some code that right before the actual page executes basically strips out the /Scott part and actually executes, a common page that's really common across all the users, but then personalizes it in that way. Rich things like that. And so there's a module API that you can plug into to take advantage of that. There's also an extensibility point that we've extended so that with ASP we have this notion of what we call global.asa. And so there was a notion of an application start and an application end event and a session start and a session end event. We actually allow you to tie into that ISAPI filter-like functionality from within that global.asa. So if you want to go ahead and do that URL rewriting, you don't even need to write a module. You can actually just do it within your global.asa-X.
And one of the places we've done a lot with security and allowing really flexible authentication. So in the past, with ASP, you used IIS as built-in authentication, which meant you authenticated against the NT SAM. With ASP.NET, we actually plug in security modules in that filter like part of the request processing. And they can fire an event, for example, to say on authenticate. And so if you want to do forms-based authentication where you go out to a mainframe or some database that you have of usernames, passwords, and do the authentication yourself, you can just write that in the global ASA or within a component that syncs that event.
So I could write my own database of usernames and have the
Exactly.
standard authentication go against that.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
And if you chose to, you could even make that even a little bit richer, which is not only just have usernames and passwords, but also have a notion of roles. So you could actually map those users into roles. And so you could actually architect your site so that you could say, rather than ACL, oh yes, Joe and Mark have access to this particular page. Instead, you could actually ACL that page to say, power users have access to that role, or to that resource. Or premium accounts have access to this part of the site. And then what you could actually do inside your database is basically tell us, yes, the username and password for Mark matched, and by the way, here are the set of roles that he belongs to. And then our security system will take care of the rest in terms of guaranteeing that he has access to those pages or services. And the key thing is all this architecture, the security architecture, the caching architecture, works for both pages as well as for these XML services that are new.
What about from a performance standpoint, with all this stuff being added, all these capabilities? I mean, are we seeing better performance, same performance?
We're actually seeing much, much better performance. We actually started when we formed the ASP.NET team. The second developer that we had on the team was actually a guy who did performance work. And what he was doing, we were working with very early versions of the Common Language Runtime. He was really investigating every operation and what was fast, what was slow, working with the runtime team to speed up the things that were slow and pointing out performance problems. And the result is that we are much, much faster than ASP. First of all of the code is compiled. So it compiles down to native code. It's no longer interpreted.
Okay, so the ASP code itself that I write as an ASP.NET programmer is an interpreted
Correct.
Now, the nice thing is you still maintain the sort of, I can still write my code in the file and hit save. It's just that instead of parsing that and passing it off to a script engine to run, interpret at runtime, we instead parse that, pass it off to a compiler, and then using the Common Language Runtime, at runtime we're actually executing native code. So you have basically, C++ level performance out of your VB code now.
So when does that compilation, does it happen when I save the file out and the NT file system notices the file change, or the first time the page is requested?
Exactly at the same time that it happened with ASP, which is when somebody requests the page, we actually notice whether we have it compiled, and if not, we'll compile it. Now we do a lot of more interesting things in ASP.NET to actually make compilation much more efficient. So it appears to you as fast as ASP did. You used to save an ASP page and you request it and suddenly it's there. It feels even faster in ASP.NET even though it is compiled. But since we are compiling it, for example, if you reboot the machine and restart it, or you shut down the web server, or you shut down the process. And I'll maybe talk a little bit more about things we've done to make the machine more reliable as well. But we don't have to recompile that page again. We can detect that it's already been compiled and just load it. So it's actually much, much faster and more scalable.
Okay, and then so that's because it's keeping it in a cache somewhere, a private cache that's hidden, and so I don't have to have a .asp file, an obj file, and an exe file and junk like that floating around.
Correct.
Okay. So you mentioned about performance, I think, or
well, we were talking about performance, and yeah, across the board, performance is much better. We've also done a lot for scalability and reliability and availability. So one of the assumptions that we made was that even though we had the common language runtime, and I think you had a session on the common language runtime that talked about all of the stuff that it does to make applications more reliable, such as really strong type checking, a managed environment that means that if you try and override an array, you'll throw an exception rather than just trashing memory. Well, even in addition to all of that, we built in reliability mechanisms above and beyond that. So for example, we can detect, obviously, a crash, but also memory leaks that spiral past a certain point. We can detect deadlocks. You can even configure it so that your application just restarts every once in a while. So we'll fire up a new instance of the application once an hour or once a day or once every 2,000 requests or something like that, and then allow the old one to finish processing the requests that it's processing, and then have the new one take over.
The key thing as part of this reliability mechanism is you don't have any interruption of service to your clients. So what will happen is we'll actually spin up dynamically a new process, start sending new requests to it, let the old process complete all the requests it's currently processing, and then we'll delete the old process. And so as a result, under the covers, the system's doing a reset effectively, but without any administrator intervention. But your customers just think, oh, the server's still there, everything's working. But as a result, you get much, much higher reliability.
Another thing that's all predicated on is that getting back to this idea of session state. And session state is no longer needs to be running in the same process as your code is running in. It can run as a service on that machine, or for a web farm scenario, you can run it on a different machine that multiple front-end machines in your web farm can share. So
you still have on one machine? Is this the session state existing?
No, it's actually possible to have the session state on stored on multiple machines, and then have multiple front-end web servers actually go ahead and access those state stores.
And so if I'm a user and I'm accessing a machine and hitting one session state on this machine, if my next access comes up to another machine, the data in the session state is shared?
Well, the way it typically works in a web farm scenario, so you're a user and you come into machine A, and then you come back a little while later and you hit machine C, is that you would have the session state on a separate machine. And that session state can either be running in our session state provider, or it can even be running within SQL Server. We have a way for SQL Server to be the server of the session information. But both of the front-end machines, as many as you have, get access to that same session state.
And that's where you're sharing data then from that standpoint.
Yes, exactly. Okay. But you can imagine that once you have that session state out of the process that is actually running the ASP, if it crashes, if we shut down your code, we detect some type of resource leak or a lockup or anything where you've configured it to just restart once an hour, all of your sessions are still safe.
Because they're stored on this separate machine.
Right. And if you even have just a single machine, you can take advantage of this. You can run it out of process with the process that's running your code, so that as those processes even just come, they can access the session state that is a safe, protected process.
So as Mark mentioned, the big benefit of this is, one, reliability. You don't have the perception of your app ever going down or your user's data ever being lost. The other big benefit is now suddenly your app is no longer tied to a single machine. If you use session state, you can now actually scale your app out across multiple machines. And as a result, there's really no upper bound in terms of how big or how many users your app can go ahead and service.
So it sounds like we have two different things going on here. One we have is that ASP.NET has a lot of new functionality and new capabilities they're exposing for people to take advantage of. And the other is that under the covers, what ASP and ASP.NET are doing for you have a lot of additional features and capabilities that just make it that much better. Which to me says if I've got an existing ASP website that's working perfectly fine for me, I don't need to make any changes to it, just upgrading and using ASP.NET as the provider of the underlying framework like that is going to make my website that much more robust.
Well, that's actually a very, very interesting point, because one of the things that we wanted to make sure was, if you are that user and you say, my app is running just fine, I don't really want to make any changes, and let me just install this ASP.NET thing on my machine. Well, if you do that, we don't actually replace ASP on a machine. So ASP and ASP.NET can run side by side on the same machine. You would actually have to explicitly move it over and configure your machine. It wouldn't be hard to do, but you would need to tell us that you want ASP.NET to be running these applications. Because you could imagine that on a box that's hosting multiple applications, if you install this new application environment with its compilers and all of this new .NET stuff, maybe not every app just upgrades flawlessly and gives you exactly the same performance. People who do server-side programming spend a lot of time tuning their application, making sure that it really works. And we wanted to not give anybody rude surprises. So ASP and ASP.NET run side by side. And so you'd actually need to
actually manually touch something to bring it up.
To say,
but if I did do that, if I did take and say, okay, let's install ASP.NET under the covers, and let's mark my files, saying, okay, these are now to run the ASP.NET environment. Even if I didn't make any other changes to the files at all, I would probably get a much more robust and scalable solution.
Well, it's good. Yeah, you would get a much more robust and scalable solution. The thing I think it is important to mention, though, is that we are not 100% compatible with ASP. We're we're relatively close, but there have been times over the last couple of years as we're developing the platform that for one reason or another we've had to break some compatibility. Some of those people won't notice at all. The order of which we get cookies has actually changed slightly. Some of them are more dramatic, and so just to set expectations, it's not 100% compatible. So the important thing is your existing code and your existing pages will continue to work just fine if you install ASP.NET.
And if you choose then to upgrade it to use ASP.NET, you want to make sure you do testing to verify that everything's still working the same.
And there will probably be some things that you need to go ahead and fix up.
Okay.
Now, for the most part, those are hopefully relatively small things that you need to change, and we will have some automated tools to help you to do that. But you probably will, on any large app, you will almost definitely have some changes that you're going to want to make.
Okay. And then let's say you wanted to take the jump and actually go to full-blown ASP.NET things. Are there any key aspects of understanding the architecture of your application you might need to rethink, or is just simply looking at what some of these new things are and taking advantage of them?
Well, that's an interesting part, is there is sort of migrating, which is taking a page or taking your skill set you have today, and you can certainly do that. And just writing, using ASP.NET, you can get much better performance using the exact same skills, exact same techniques that you do. Something that I recommend to people when they start looking at the platform is to play around with all the features. Because in addition to sort of migrating, a lot of times I think people, it's sometimes worthwhile stepping back and saying, well, actually there's all these new features. Rather than just migrate, maybe I should actually re-architect a little bit. This validation that we mentioned earlier in the episode, most apps have some degree of validation. It might make sense rather than, you can keep your existing validation logic and it'll just get faster under ASP.NET, but it might make sense to actually rip yours out and actually use our validation components instead. A lot of people have their own sort of security architecture that they've built with ASP, where they have sort of an HTML sign-in page. They might actually decide to say, well, actually, rather than use my own technique and use session state to keep track of who the user identity is, I might actually want to use the built-in forms-based authentication that comes with ASP.NET. Caching is something else in terms of performance that we didn't mention earlier. A lot of advanced developers go ahead and have actually come up with very good techniques to try to figure out how can I cache results, parts of a page or an entire page on the server, so that when two browsers request the same particular resource, I don't have to regenerate both. I can just use the cached version on the second one. With ASP.NET, we have built-in caching support. So all those sort of features add up, and it's worthwhile spending before you just sort of blindly start playing with it. It's actually worth playing around with the quick starts. We have about 900 samples that we ship as part of the SDK. It's got a large number.
Yeah.
We also have some great end-to-end applications that we ship, an e-commerce app, a portal framework app for building like an intranet portal. It's worth actually playing around with those and looking at how they're architected, because I think you'll find that there's a lot of tips and tricks that you can pick up and dramatically reduce the amount of code you write. And also the code that you do end up writing becomes a lot cleaner. And I think you're going to find that suddenly that 50 lines of sort of unmanageable code becomes about 5 or 6 lines of really clean code that when you come back a couple of weeks later and look at it, you'll know immediately what it does.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
I've come back to code sometimes. What was I doing? Well, thanks a lot, Scott and Mark. Mark, did you have any closing comments you want to have? Scott had the little last bit there about what he thought was important.
Well, I guess really to sort of zoom up to the 50,000-foot level is to really just, the key things about ASP.NET are that, number one, it makes developers a lot more productive. It makes applications and systems more reliable. We didn't even talk about the deployment stuff, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that make applications really easy to deploy. So, for example, if you copy a DLL while your application's running, it's not locked anymore. Your application will actually gracefully migrate to the new version. I mean, there's a whole host of stuff, and really improving performance, reliability, and availability, and scalability. I guess all of the abilities are really the key top-level things. Beyond all that, there's just a tremendous amount of new features. I know a lot of people who've seen the progression from ASP 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 have seen, there are now 3 new methods on the server object or the response object or something like that. This is, just a tremendous wealth of new features. And Scott and I think, have done hundreds of presentations over the last 3 years of ASP.NET, and I remember saying to him after about the first month that our winning streak can't continue forever, but up until this point it has, and as we've gotten it out into the hands of literally hundreds of thousands of developers, the enthusiasm has been really incredible.
I think it's best summed up with comment that a few advanced developers made to me at a conference recently, which is, this makes web development fun again, which is something that they've been thinking of as sort of a job for the last 2 years. This is something that's really new, that just makes their life a lot, makes developing a lot easier, but also just makes it a lot of fun to build apps.
A lot of fun, a lot of good way to make money.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for joining us. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
audience appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll probably see you back here again sometime.
I hope so.
Great, thanks. Well, that covers the architecture segment about ASP.NET. After this short break, we'll come back and be talking to people about programming ASP.NET and what that means for you. So stay tuned.
Hi there, this is Andy Himes on the Microsoft campus. I'm from MSDN, and we're the folks that put out this wonderful newspaper, the Developer Network News, and the Development Library CD. And about a year ago, a company called Interstellar Propeller in Berkeley, California sent us this gold-plated propeller hat to deliver to Bill Gates in recognition of him being the head propeller head guy at the Microsoft campus. So let's see if we can't go in the building here and track down Bill and deliver to him personally. So here we are in the reception area of Bill's building. And we got the art on the wall here. And come on over here, I want to show you something. This here is a graphical representation of the product plans for Visual C++ 8.0. I believe it's due in the 98 time frame. Hello, Inga. How you doing?
Hi.
Hi, I'm Andy. I'm from MSDN, as you can see from my hat.
Yes.
And I need 15 minutes on Bill Gates' schedule this afternoon so that I can deliver this wonderful gold-plated propeller hat to him.
No, I mean, that's great, but he's booked solid. He's got meetings, he's got project reviews. Today's just not going to happen. His next open time looks like next Thursday about noon.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but that's just not going to work for me because we're live today and we want to present it on camera. I know it's funny, but is there any way that we can kind of bend the schedule a little bit? Any way we can slip in for just a...
Well, you know, we can't bend the schedule, but Bell Red Barbershop.
The Bell Red, oh, excuse me, the Bell Red Barbershop. Okay, the haircut, undoubtedly, right?
Right.
Okay, that sounds perfect. I
Okay.
think we can do that. Thanks a lot, Inga.
Sure.
There's a hat in it for you, by the way.
Great.
Take care.
Bye.
Well, we're on a great start here on our quest to deliver this hat to Bill Gates, and I think the barbershop is exactly the right place to go. You know, wouldn't it be cool if this was one of those old-fashioned romantic barbershops like the one where I got my first haircut when I was about 6 years old, with moose heads on the wall and a stack of 10-year-old Field and Stream magazines on the cabinet there, and 5 chairs, no waiting.
ASP.NET. Understanding the architecture is fine and dandy, but when the rubber hits the road, you want a couple of code junkies to help you understand what's really going on. And here with me today, I actually have a couple of code junkies from codejunkies.net. Got Dave Seven, Doug Seven, and Don Volthaus. Tell me a little bit about your company and how you got started doing ASP.NET programming.
Actually, the irony of it is that Don and I both met while working at Microsoft. We were working in developer support, and our role was pretty much to troubleshoot and help programmers who were trying to figure out how to get their applications to work the way they envisioned them, or to learn some new technology that was out that they hadn't had any experience with. And we kind of saw that there was a lot of opportunity out there to really kind of get out in the world and help businesses develop applications that were suited to what their business was looking for and really provide the service that they need. And there was a lot of people doing it that were okay at it, but not great. There were a lot of people doing it that were really great. We saw that there was a good place for us right in there to provide a service. So we decided that time came and it was time to head off on our own and start a consulting company, which was codejunkies.net. And as ASP.NET developed and came out, we saw that this was really going to be the future. This is where things were going to be going. And we wanted to get in on it as early as we could. And, you know, most people spend their spare time doing things like, you know, pottery or golf. We spend our spare time writing code. So it was a chance to get in and spend our, you know, late nights with lots of coffee and weekends working on ASP.NET.
And you've been working with ASP.NET or an ASP Plus, what it was called before then, for about how long now?
We had some exposure to it, at least from concepts, while we were still at Microsoft. We'd heard of it, and there was rumors of it going around, but we really hadn't seen it. My first exposure to it was at the PDC, Microsoft PDC in July. I was down there, got really exposed to it. They gave us discs on the second day, and I spent the entire time working on it and came back, and that's pretty much all I've been doing ever since. And going back and writing actual ASP code now, it's like, wait, how do you do this again after it's been so long?
That's the old archaic
Yeah,
fashion.
it's like the legacy application. So.
And then I caught the bug from him on it and went full force ever since.
So what are some of the things that you find are really exciting about ASP.NET over ASP?
One of the things Mark Anders was talking about was deployment and how easy ASP.NET.
He barely got a chance to even touch on that at the very end.
Cut off on the end. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit because we both kind of agree that that's one of the really neat things about ASP.NET is the simple deployment. While ASP.NET applications are compiled code, unlike traditional compiled code, you don't need to worry about registering DLLs or shutting down services. For instance, in today's ASP, if you have a business object that is a critical part of your site and you want to replace that object with either a newer version or one that has extended functionality, you have to essentially shut down the website so the DLL gets unlocked, replace it, register it on the system, restart up your website. So you have some downtime you have to worry about. The nice thing with ASP.NET is you don't have to worry about any of that. There's no, regserve 32, which is the the nemesis of programmers everywhere, is gone. Instead now you simply take the new DLL, drop it into the same directory where the old one is, requests that are currently accessing the DLL, the old DLL, continue to process. Newer requests start hitting against the new DLL, and as soon as the old DLL is finished with all the requests on it, it gets dropped and the new one is fully replaced with no downtime at all. So very simple, drop in what they call Xcopy deployment. Really makes our lives so much easier.
And the benefit of that then is that like you're not having to take and worry about finding out which DLLs are closed down and closing them down or also over the web thing. Now, what if you had like a DLL that had like a bug in it per se, and you were fixing it? Is there a way to make all of the current use of the DLL shut off that much quicker? Or would you still have to shut down the website to stop that?
You could, well, it seems to me the kind of easiest thing to do is maintain the backward version of it, the previous version of it, and then do the same thing, just redrop it in the place, and it'll quickly replace itself through the Xcopy.
Okay. So other than deployment, what are some of the things that you think an ASP programmer would really start needing to gravitate towards in order to use ASP.NET, why they would find it something that really got their juices going?
Well, for me, I come from a VB background, so for me it was kind of a nice revisit to, hey, I get to do real programming again. I don't have to worry about scripting. I don't have to follow this linear top to bottom processing model. With scripting, I can do full compiled code. I can have a little bit greater logic involved and deal with a lot of the new server controls that are in there and really provide a lot more functionality than what I was getting through ASP, which is really nice.
And it does. It saves tons of time on development. Because you can create your DLLs in the same development environment as your ASP Plus pages, or ASP.NET rather. Now we're safe to call it that. But besides that, the biggest thing that I think people would benefit from switching over is the caching.
We understand caching and importance on standard web pages on the client-side caching, how quickly it makes pages coming up, and just getting server-side caching and ASP caching of the code, compiled code, just really speeds things up quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, and one of the nice things too with the output caching is, as an example, say you have a online store. One of the sites we'd been working on was a CD store online. You have a number of products that you display on the page. So you have to go out to the database, get all the information for the products, all their prices and all that kind of information, and bring it back to the page. So you have that delay time while the script in ASP gets processed, goes out to the database, brings information back. Now with caching, you can go ahead and set your output caching for the page. Once the data has been retrieved, that page is essentially cached as raw HTML output. So you no longer have to go through the process of going to get the data and bring it back, because it's already there. It's already been done once. No need to do it again. ASP.NET, the .NET framework process, will keep track of that page, and if any of the information changes in the database, it'll go ahead and recache that page. So you don't need to worry about, do I have the most current information on there, because ASP.NET is kind of monitoring that for you. And you have the ability to set certain caching options as far as how long you want it to cache for in time, how many clicks you want it to be cached for, things of that nature. So it really enables your site to give the user the information that much faster, because essentially it's just looking for raw HTML now. It's not having to do all this business processing anymore.
And that then helps the website developer to actually tune the performance of their site a little bit more by maintaining the cache and how fast things come through on it.
Yeah, and essentially you're looking at the ability then for one physical server to generate that many more hits per second, because it no longer has to worry about all this extra processing. Yeah.
So from a code standpoint, what are some of the big code differences that a person's going to be paying attention to first when they're writing their first ASP.NET applications?
Surprisingly, while there are a lot of differences as far as what ASP.NET can do, a minimal jump from ASP to ASP.NET is really not that big of a deal. There are some things you have to watch out for. With ASP and VBScript, we're used to, when we want to create something like a record set object, we have to set that variable equal to the record set object. Well, the set parameter is now gone. So now we can just have that variable equal to an ADO record set object, for example. So minimal, small syntactical things like that don't really affect the page performance at all, but you do have to look for those things when you're migrating your pages. A few minor changes like that, but really the migration from just ASP to the very minimal amount of migration to ASP.NET doesn't require a whole lot. And as I think Scott was mentioning, the two can also run side by side. So you're not forced to migrate the entire site at once. You can do it kind of page by page as you can get to them.
I think the biggest part will be going back and declaring all the proper data types. You can still use the server.createObject, and right now in ASP you could do say a dim rs, which is going to be a record set object. Then you set it. You'll have to actually dim rs as new ADO record set, right?
That's one option. At the minimal migration level, you really don't have to, though. You can still leave it as a dim rs, and it'll essentially create it as a generic object that then gets turned into a record set.
But no, the main difference there is that one is the VB script way of diminishing an object, the other one is a Visual Basic way of doing it.
Exactly.
So you're now actually bumping up to a full-fledged development language that's got types.
Exactly. We finally have data types.
Yeah.
You know, and we can deal more strictly with memory management of our application, and rather than dimming everything as a variant, we can now dim things as, you know, string or integer or, you know, a data set. So we're now able to kind of conserve memory and control memory usage a lot better.
Well, why don't we take a look at some of the code you brought along with you to illustrate what goes on here.
One of the first examples that I wanted to show you is just kind of what we've just been talking about with the migration, where if we look at a typical page here, and let me go ahead and show you the code behind this page, where we're just looking at, oops, that's the wrong one. We're looking at just on the output side, we're looking at just a table filled with data from, in this case, it's the Northwind database, where we're looking at contact name and city from the customer's table. So in typical ASP, for the code, what we have here is, you know, we're dimming our connection, we're dimming our record set, and we're creating those objects right here on the screen. You know, we're creating our connection. We're again, with the set keyword, setting our record set equal to the execute of that connection. And then as we go down the page a little bit, you see we have a do while loop where we actually loop through the record set and do a response.write out onto the page with all that information. Pretty typical stuff in ASP, and anybody who's been doing ASP has done this 101 times in their sleep probably. So to make again the very minimal migration over to the .NET side of things, where we want to go through and just look for what has changed, what are some of the things that are no longer compatible. Things like the set keyword here that we used on our connection and on our record set, well, those keywords are going to go away. And one other thing I'll point out, and I'll show you the code for this, is with the record set down here where we create where we do the response.write with the contact name and the city, we're going to go ahead right after that and add the property value, which basically says we're going to take the value of this particular column of this particular row and print it on the screen. So a slight change, but fairly minimal. So you can see the code here, it almost looks the same. There's very, very little change. Yeah, it's like magic. Yeah. Very minimal changes where just those set keywords are gone, and again, value has been added. But essentially, the code itself is intact. So if we go back and we'll take a look at how that page renders and see, you know, the drastic difference in output. That there you go, basically the same thing. But now we're running, and you can tell by the extension of the page, the .aspx, we're now running under the .NET framework. So we're seeing, again, we have potentially the ability for caching and things of that nature that we could use. We haven't implemented on this page, but we could. And if we were to take it one step further than that, and really take advantage of what the .NET framework offers and what ASP.NET offers, is things like managed providers for getting data, where in this case we're working with the Northwind database on a SQL 7 server. One of the things .NET provides is a SQL managed provider, which essentially is a straight link into SQL without having to deal with OLADB. We're going right into SQL, getting the data, and it's proven to be much, much faster in my experience. So if we start looking at a little bit different code here, again, to get virtually the same output, slight difference in the look of the code, where now we're explicitly telling the page we're dealing in actual VB. We're no longer dealing with VB script, we're dealing with the full VB language. And we're going to do some things where we're going to import some namespaces, system.data, so we have the basic data capabilities, and then also the SQL namespace to get the SQL managed provider access.
So this is the same sort of stuff we saw in the previous episode. We're talking about C#, where you're using this to bring in the access to the various class libraries that the .NET framework supports. And so now we're showing the .NET class libraries coming in VB in basically the exact same fashion.
As far as from an ASP .NET page, exactly the same fashion. If I was doing this in C#, the code would look different. The import for the namespaces is going to be the same. For classes, it's going to be a little bit different, but on an ASP.NET page, we're good to go either way. We can do a few changes and move everything over to C# real quick. Essentially, a lot of the code we had got to be kept here, as far as things like our, the SQL connection string changed just slightly. Obviously the SQL select statement stayed the same. One of the things I'll point out here is with the select statement, or excuse me, with the connection string, we dropped the ADO provider. We're no longer specifying SQL OLADB as our ADO provider because we're using the SQL managed provider, so we're going right into SQL 7, which gives us a little bit better performance, actually considerably better performance. We create a data set which is gonna hold our data, and then we go out and get it. To kind of cut through the code here a little bit, we go out using a SQL dataset command, retrieve the results of our select statement and bring them back over to our page here, and we fill them into this data set, and we call that table customers. So now we have this data set object that has a table called customers in it. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and actually continue to fill that data set with additional tables and relationships. So unlike an ADO record set, we now have this kind of bigger thing where we can have full tables separated out and their relationships and constraints maintained, which is a great advantage for doing bigger applications. And then what we did here, I'm going to skip a couple lines of code here to show you where we're going with this, which is down at towards the bottom of the page here, we have an ASP data grid server control. What the data grid server control is, it's just a raw table. It's kind of a table in its most basic form. And the only thing we've done is told it we're going to run it at the server, so it's now a server-side control. And I added a couple things here just to show you a little bit of just a very small amount of what .NET can do. Again, we set the border width to 0 because our old table was a 0 border width. But I added a property, the alternating item style back color, which if you've done any work with tables in ASP, to just do something simple as making every other item have a different back color so it's easy to identify is a lot of code you have to write. You have to loop through and you have to change the back color on each one. Here we just simply do it with a property, and we change it to a kind of a light gray background.
Yeah, basically, what I'm noticing, you've got an ASP tag.
Mm-hmm.
You're sticking. That's the thing that identifies the fact that this is an ASP server-side control or something like that you're sticking in?
Yeah, the prefix to this, the ASP prefix, identifies it as kind of one of the stock ASP controls, the server controls that come with the .NET framework. We could also create our own custom controls and give them a separate prefix.
Oh, okay.
We could easily create a series of code junkies controls that are prefixed with code junkies and then whatever the name of the control is, which actually we have done for our own sites, for our own use internally. So now what we see with this is essentially we're looking for a similar result. And let me show you the difference in what we get here. We're going up against the SQL provider, and we've added that additional property for the back alternating item back color. Same basic layout, but we very, very easily added this alternating color to the table. And there's a ton of other things we could do with it for editing the data grid and adding all kinds of different properties to it. But that's how simple it is. And that's one of the nice things with the server controls is we have this ability now to expose properties and methods that then get rendered as HTML. It makes it very easy for us as a programmer. It makes it much quicker.
So the main difference I saw in that particular portion of the code is rather than having your own while loop that you were looping through the record set and at certain times emitting the HTML appropriate for doing the thing, you just basically dropped a table. And you told the table, oh, and by the way, your values come from this record set.
Exactly. One of the things that I kind of skipped over and I meant to come back to is right up here before the end of our code, we call this the data grid by name and tell it to bind what it's going to render, bind that to the results from our data set. It's in a specific table in our data set. So it says, okay, well, this is where the data comes from, so I'm going to need to generate as many rows as necessary to use all the data in here.
Now, for an example where you just got a simple table you're trying to display on the screen, I mean, that's kind of like an obvious way of doing it. What if you had like a more complex example where your previous while loop was doing some calculations and trying to do some fancy string formatting, stuff like that? Would you still be able to do the same general style of doing a while loop there and walk through the record set?
Certainly. That's one of the great things with the kind of the amount of server controls that are included with .NET. We could easily do some customization to the data grid, which is a kind of a basic raw table. There's also a data list, which will essentially generate one row and one cell for each record, and then we can customize it using templates for each iteration through the loop. And then there's kind of the folding metal chair of the data controls, which is the repeater, which allows for full customization using templates. And so we'd have a header template and a footer template, that's where we could maybe perhaps start and end a table. And then we'd have item templates and alternating item templates where we could provide more custom layout And a lot of stuff we've done with our tutorial site that I think Scott had mentioned earlier, aspnextgen.com, is we've done a lot of work with the data repeater to provide some more custom output.
Great, great. I can imagine some of the exciting capabilities of doing that sort of thing. And now, you also mentioned that you can develop your own controls you can stick on the page. And so if the existing table grid control didn't quite do what you wanted to do, you could actually write your own code and just reuse it anywhere else on your site you wanted to.
Yeah, and the nice thing is you can not only write your own code, but you can actually extend a custom or extend one of the stock server controls. So I can kind of work off of the data grid and extend the functionality of the data grid to suit my specific needs. And we can do this either through full compiled server controls, or we can do what are called user controls, which are kind of a happy medium between doing it all on the page and doing it with a server control. It's kind of the include file on steroids, so to speak, where you can do a lot more, and you can expose things like properties and methods for your user control, and really add a lot more functionality.
Now, in developing some of these additional user control sort of things, is this a more complex programming than what you might be used to normally inside of ASP, but you get a lot more power for it, or?
Well, it's the complexity of a, for instance, a user control is amazing. You simply create an ASPC file and write some HTML in it, and you've got yourself a user control. That's at its most basic form. If you had, for instance, a header to a page that you wanted to include on every page, much like you would do with an include file now, you could easily just take that HTML output and put it into your user control. So at its simplest form, it's just HTML. Additionally, if I wanted to, in much the same way I did some code on these pages here, I could provide some functionality in the user control to expose properties like I want to have an alternating, I want to be able to set the background color of my user control on every page. So I can provide a back color property for my user control and then have some code that sets that when the page is rendered. So it's actually very easy, surprisingly.
But it can be very complex. Because I created one. You have to take into account building your own server control from scratch. Say you want to build a data grid control. It can be very complex because of the way things are rendered with the .NET framework. There's a create child controls method that happens before a pre-render method happens, before the controls or child controls are actually rendered to the page. And so if you're doing data binding or want to set back colors, you got to do it at the correct time, or else you aren't going to get what you want when the actual page is rendered. So it can be very, very complex. The one I did that, it takes which server control was that? Add rotator control, which is an inherent .NET server control, which is basically a control that is bound to an XML file that shows different ads, on your website each time the page is requested. And presently, in its stock form, it has a image URL, which is a URL to where the image file is, and it has a navigation URL, which when you click on the advertisement, it brings you to that page. Has alternating alternate text, which is if the page does not render images, it will show that, basically what you do when you show advertisements. Now, one thing it didn't have was a way to find out how many times that particular banner showed up. And so I encapsulated the server control as is, let it have all the same properties it has now, but also put like a countdown sequence where you can, in the XML file, put an impression count, set it to 100 for one person or 200 to another, and as it shows and as the impressions count up, or count down rather, as soon as it hits 0, that image will never show again. So it's something you could go out and sell if you wanted to, but that took quite a while to build.
Yeah, and I guess the kind of the long and the short of it is, if you're an experienced or even inexperienced ASP developer, making a really basic user control is very easy. It's very easy to do. And as with anything in our current technology, you can take it a long ways. You can go really deep and really low level and do a lot with it, depending on your level of experience and how much exposure you've had to it.
So it's kind of like writing a hello world in assembler is pretty complex. Writing in C is really easy, but that doesn't mean that all programs you write in C are going to be easy to write.
Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of how far you want to go.
Yeah. But it sounds like we're actually expanding capabilities, so as a developer really wanted to get down and dirty and have complex applications that are running on the web servers, they could really do an awful lot with ASP.NET.
Yeah.
What are some of the future capabilities you're seeing and the future web services that you think people are going to be designing that are being based on ASP.NET?
It's a big world.
Endless.
It's a really
Credit card
big,
validation would be a huge one.
yeah.
To be able to pass in a credit card number, a name, an address, and then have the web service validate every part of it and return back either you could either have a Boolean yes, it's yeah, go ahead and do the transaction, or false no, but it could also return, oh, the name was spelt wrong here, or complete validation, or a zip code validator.
There's just so much out there. Scott had mentioned we have some web service examples on our site where they're very basic. They take no input parameters. They're strictly output. You call them and they say, here's all the most recent. Actually, it's not even most recent. Here's all the tutorials we have on our site, and it gives you enough information you can do with it whatever you want. Things like, I can see a huge market for it with affiliate programs. Companies like Amazon.com who do a lot of affiliate work where people sell their books on their own site and it goes through Amazon, but those people get credit for selling it. That's screaming for a web service. I mean, that's a perfect example of how to get the books to show up where you could pass in a category. I want mysteries, or I want books by Stephen King, and just get that output returned from this web service.
So actually, Amazon is not the web page you're going to specifically, but you're actually asking Amazon, give me the image, give me the titles, give me the categories, and I'll display them in whatever fancy way I want to do it myself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about the web services, and I think Scott Mark talked about this as well, is that it's XML based. And so you have this really standardized format for getting the information and doing with it however you want. So you don't necessarily have to be a .NET website to use the web service. As long as you can read, parse through and use the XML file, you can use the web service.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the gotchas that maybe you ran across early on doing .NET programming that maybe if you gave our audience some little heads up on, they could get involved in this that much quicker?
Well, at this stage, there's a lot of them because there's so limited documentation. But a lot of just the syntactical things that you've done so many times and you're so used to, and kind of learning to think differently. Right. Learning to think, wow, there's a whole different way I could be approaching this. I don't have to do it the way I've always done it. Going through and remembering that now parentheses are required around procedure calls, that things you just forget because you haven't been doing them because you've been doing the scripting work for so long. Those are kind of the biggest ones, just kind of learning to rethink the approach. I don't know if you've had different experiences.
Well, at first, the whole assembly namespace, what is this stuff? Because I was a VB programmer also, and I am now a C# programmer because I love it. What you can do in 20 codes of VB, it takes 5 codes of C#. Yeah. It's just a great language. But that concept took about a day to get, and then after that, oh, okay, they're basically just bundles of code that have certain things in it that if I want to do this, I can use this instead of writing my own code, which you typically have to do, except for COM components solve most of that, but this takes it a step further.
So understanding what assemblies are is
assemblies, namespaces, get the groundwork, understand the framework.
Yeah.
You'll understand anything.
I think the concept is really the key there with namespaces and assemblies. Obviously, the more you understand them, the more you know about the framework. Conceptually understanding what they are and why you need them is really the key. And that's where I think some of the ASP developers, people I know, who have come into ASP without any background in programming other than that, the ASP has always been very friendly. It's been very easy to get into and kind of work your way into it. And so there is a bit of a jump coming to .NET. If you've come from a programming background, it's a little easier jump to make because you're familiar with the concepts. You're familiar with things like data types and procedure calls and whatnot. That maybe somebody who's just done the scripting, that's a bigger step for them to make.
Yeah, I mean, ASP programming is that whole scripting on the web page, whether it's client-side scripting or server-side scripting, always is kind of a hackish way of programming. You're just kind of tossing code and constantly fixing it up here and there. And now it sounds like ASP.NET is actually more of a formalized model for doing development.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can now totally separate your code. You can have HTML code, and you can have your programmatic code where you're actually manipulating data and affecting the outlook.
Now you mentioned that you're a C# programmer now.
Yeah.
Now ASP.NET supports C# on the page. So like this example we saw with the SQL Server stuff, and you were using Visual Basic, not VB Script, but Visual Basic, you could have been using C# for programming on that page as well.
Or Eiffel or VB
COBOL.
or
Or COBOL.
COBOL or just about anything I want at this
JavaScript
point. Yeah.
or JScript.
There's you know, and every day it seems like I hear somebody say, oh, there's another language added, you know, so I think that before long you'll be able to do anything you want with anything you want, you know, so, and that's one of the great things about it is you're no longer confined to, like you were with ASP, either VB Script or JavaScript. Now it's, you know, what are you familiar with? What do you like to program in the most? If you like COBOL, more power to you, go for it, have fun. And you can do that, and I think that opens up the door to a lot of people. I've worked with a lot of C++ object developers who were always kind of, I don't want to say scared of ASP, but shied away from it because they're like, oh, I don't want to have to get into VB Script. Now they don't have to. So it's really even more friendly in that sense.
Great. Are there any closing words you think our audience could benefit from about, you know, diving into ASP.NET and learning how to program it and biting off everything?
Live it, love it, learn it, sleep it, you know, embrace it, I think, is the key thing. It's definitely a great tool. It makes development of websites just tremendously easier in some sense, and I can do a lot more much easier, which gives me time to do more fun stuff. And it has, I think it was Scott that mentioned that it's become fun. It's become more, you know, kind of back to when, hey, I just got into it and it's fun, it's great to do. So I'd say, you know, if you're even thinking about maybe learning ASP.NET, start learning it now so that when it does come out, you're, you know, pretty well versed in it and you're having fun the entire time.
You're here. No, we're in a lot of news groups and a lot of mailing lists, and we see a lot of people saying that this is just another Microsoft thing, you know, ASP3 just came out, what's the use for another technology? Investigate it. Don't just pass it by because you think it's something Microsoft's trying to do. It truly is the third generation of the internet. It takes the internet up a notch with vigor.
Yep.
Well, what I'm hearing is you guys are really enjoying it. And
I really hate ASP development now. I really do.
It's hard to go back.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you've walked into this candy store of all these great things, and then somebody said, no, you got to go outside. You know, it's like, oh, I got to go back and do
We have projects now that, and .NET would take us a day.
Yeah.
In ASP, we have to make the COM component over here. Got to do, you know, testing, deployment.
Yeah.
It saves an amazing amount of time.
It is. It's, you know, I was working on an ASP application a while back where I think it was 1,000 lines of code, and most of it was just different types of validation of all the possibilities that could happen, which 300 lines in .NET would have done it. You know, I'm jubilant.
And you're going to say, please, can I use .NET? Can I use .NET?
Please. So.
Now, but of course, you know, talking to our developer audience out there and getting them going .NET, isn't that kind of increasing your competition a bit? I mean,
yeah, but we got here first.
Okay.
I think so. Actually, I think that's good. I think it encourages people to be a little bit more aggressive about coming up with new ideas and things to do. You know, I feel comfortable that we know what we're doing, and so competition is not too scary, but it's a good thing. I think it's good to have other people working on the same stuff and being competitive.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. I appreciated talking with you and seeing the examples and hearing your enthusiasm for the ASP.NET, and I'm sure our audience enjoyed it as well. And I'll include a link to your website on the transcript so they can go check out CodeJunkies.net and take a look at some of the samples you're providing out there. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that covers ASP.NET. Hopefully you learned everything you need to know in order to understand the architecture, some of the programming aspects, and even seeing where I can help you make better applications for your web services. Now all you have to do is actually install ASP.NET, use it, try it out, and learn to love it like our guest did. Well, there's still a little bit left of the show, so don't go away, and we'll catch you later.
Microsoft's website is one of the most heavily trafficked websites in the world and contains in the neighborhood of 500,000 website pages. With me today is Kerry Woolsey. He is a product planner for Microsoft's website. Kerry, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Nice to be here, Erica.
Thanks. So 500,000 pages, I can imagine that's a lot to plan for. So tell me what it means to be a product planner for Microsoft website.
Well, as you said, it is a lot of work. Right now what we're doing, Microsoft has a huge website, as you said, 500,000 pages, and a lot of these pages are in individual sites. MSDN has a huge site, TechNet, the product sites. And so one of the things we're trying to do is really work towards having a better customer experience so that customers can move across these sites much simpler. They'll be able to navigate through. We're also working very closely on trying to help customers complete specific tasks.
So what are some of the biggest challenges that you're finding in trying to implement that consistent experience for the customers?
Well, communication is a big thing, trying to get all of the teams talking together, because each one of these sites, MSDN, TechNet, and so forth, they all have individual teams. So what we're doing on the product planning team is we're trying to get everybody talking together, everybody working together, finding the similarities, and finding ways so that everybody agrees this is the best way to work, this is the best thing for the customer. Doing a lot of research to try and find out what our customers want, how it's going to make their jobs easier as they use their products, our products.
So now you're a product planner. What are some of the previous jobs you've had at Microsoft, and how long have you been at this company?
I've been here for just about 4 years, and before my current position, I worked on MSDN, was also a product planner, and I was dealing specifically with community issues. So, for example, the ratings and comments feature that were added to all of the articles and content on MSDN about 9 months ago or so. I was working on that. Also, the Members Helping Members program, also worked on that. One of the things that we were really trying to do on MSDN was to make community available everywhere. Originally, we had in the navigation bar, we had this community section, but people didn't really want to go to a community section. They might have a comment when they read an article or think about something, but they didn't really think, oh, well, I'm going to go over to the community area.
What it meant.
Yeah, exactly. So what we tried to do is make it so that from anywhere, a person can talk to other customers, they can give us feedback, they can give each other feedback. As they read the articles, they can let us know and let other customers know if they're good articles or if they're bad articles.
Well, tell me a little bit about what you do outside of Microsoft. It sounds like your experience here has been varied and keeps you plenty busy, I'm sure. But what do you do outside of work for fun?
Yeah, well, usually, unfortunately, it's not during the week, but on the weekends,
Right.
I'm a big golf fan, and that's actually a fairly new thing. I've been playing golf around 3 years. Before that, I always made fun of golf, and so it's kind of strange
Why did you make fun of golf?
Well, it seemed pointless. I mean, the whole idea is an exercise in frustration. You have this little tiny ball that you have to hit yards and yards down there into this only slightly larger hole with sticks. I mean, it just didn't seem all that exciting to me. But I went to a conference, actually, for Microsoft, Web Tech Ed, about 3 years ago. It was in Palm Springs. So I was in Palm Springs, and I thought, well, what am I going to do at Palm Springs, you know, some activity? And I thought, well, I'll go play golf. So me and a coworker decided to go play golf, and I was making fun of golf all through this little 9-hole round we played. And suddenly when I got done, I just loved it. I just had a blast.
Clicked how much you liked it.
So I go to the driving range a couple of times a week. I try and play golf at least once a week.
What's your handicap?
I'm about a 14 right now. Kind of getting a little lower.
That's good.
Yeah, it's not bad.
That's good.
It's not bad. I don't suck anymore.
Right. So what else besides golf do you like to do outside of work?
Well, I'm a big sailor. I actually live on my sailboat and have for about 6 years now.
Wow.
And so I've sort of taken on the sailing lifestyle, and I try to go maybe a couple of times a month, try and get out for a couple of hours. Just very relaxing to be out on the water. Actually, before I started at Microsoft about 4 years ago, I took the summer off and sailed up to Alaska, sailed up the Inside Passage to Alaska, took my boat up there. Beautiful area, Southeast Alaska. In a sense, I got my own cruise, and the nice thing was I could decide when I wanted to stop and spend an extra day somewhere.
Right.
But just beautiful scenery, beautiful wildlife, bears, eagles. It was great.
So you live on your sailboat.
Yeah.
What's that like?
Well, it's a little cramped. No, it's actually a lot cramped. And unfortunately, it's somewhat cluttered because you just don't have a lot of space. Mainly, the reason I originally moved aboard was that eventually, when I'm done with my career, I want to sail around the world. Take about 5 years and just sort of sail all over the place, South Pacific, everywhere. And so I thought, well, I better get used and see if I can actually live on a boat for that long. So I was able to get this sailboat, and I've lived aboard ever since and love it.
Well, Kerry, thanks so much for talking to me today. It's been great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of another episode of the MSDN Show. Hopefully you learned a lot of great information about how you can use ASP.NET in your web services.
And stay tuned for the next episode on SOAP.
Until then, we'll see you on the web.